Hi, my name is Jessica, and I'm 32 years old. Last spring, I returned to my parents' home in Austin, Texas for a night that was supposed to be filled with celebration, their wedding anniversary. I held my 7-year-old son, Leo, by the hand as we walked up the wide front porch, its wooden boards creaking softly under our steps. The house glowed with familiar warmth, lanterns strung along the railing, the scent of roasted meat and apple pie floating out through the open windows. Inside, the heavy oak furniture gleamed under the soft light, and the hallway walls were lined with decades of family photographs, smiles frozen in time, memories meant to capture harmony. My mother, Margaret, bustled about in a pale blue dress, her hands busy with last-minute decorations, while my father, Charles, sat in his armchair near the fireplace, his face unreadable, his presence heavy as always. My brother, Andrew, had arrived with his wife, Amanda, and their twins, Lily and Adam, whose laughter rang out as they chased each other between the grown-ups, knocking into chairs without a care. To an outsider, the scene might have looked like a picture of tradition, a proud American family celebrating love and longevity. But as soon as I stepped through the doorway, a familiar weight pressed down on me. Behind the polished silverware and careful smiles, there lingered a tension so sharp I could feel it in the air, a silent reminder that, no matter how much I wished it otherwise, I had never truly belonged at this table. I guided Leo toward the dining room, helping him out of his jacket before settling him in a chair beside me. He looked so proud in his collared shirt, his small hands clutching the toy car he carried everywhere. My mother, Margaret, hurried past with a tray of glasses, her smile tight but practiced, as though she was determined to keep everything perfect for the evening. Across the table, Andrew was already leaning back in his chair, his arm casually draped around Amanda as he told Dad about his latest case at work. Amanda nodded along, throwing in little details about the twins' school and their endless activities. Lily and Adam giggled at some private joke, their voices high-pitched and sweet, a sharp contrast to the undercurrent of silence that seemed to hum just beneath the conversation. I tried to break the stiffness, offering a light-hearted story about Leo's latest adventure at the park. He tried to race the neighbor's Labrador, and though he lost miserably, he'd laughed so hard he rolled in the grass until his shirt was covered in dirt. I chuckled as I told it, hoping to spark even a small laugh. But my voice fell flat against the heavy air. Andrew gave a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Amanda pressed her lips together as if she didn't know how to respond, and my mother's gaze darted nervously toward Charles. My father hadn't reacted at all. He sat there, jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the table as if the silverware offended him. The clinking of forks against plates filled the silence. I reached under the table to squeeze Leo's hand. He gave me a soft smile, his innocence untouched by the tension that I felt building with each passing minute. The celebration I had hoped would be warm and welcoming was quickly unraveling, and though I tried to push down the dread, I could feel it creeping higher with every awkward pause and forced laugh. Something was coming. I just didn't know when or how loud it would be. It happened faster than I could prepare for. One moment, the twins were laughing, Amanda was cutting Lily's food into smaller bites, and Andrew was scrolling through his phone under the table. The next, the air split with the sound of my father's fist slamming down against the polished wood. Plates rattled, glasses tipped, and a small cascade of red wine spilled across the white tablecloth, bleeding like an open wound. The room froze. My heart leapt into my throat as I looked up. Charles, my father, stood slowly from his chair, his face red, his chest rising and falling with sharp breaths. His voice thundered through the dining room, louder than the crackle of the fireplace, louder than the children's startled gasps. You are a disgrace, Jessica. A single mother. A failure. Why can't you be more like Andrew? Why can't you get your life together? The words hit me harder than his fist against the table. For a moment, silence stretched like glass about to shatter. Amanda's eyes widened, and even Andrew shifted uncomfortably, his hand lowering his fork but saying nothing. Leo stopped mid-bite, his big brown eyes lifting to mine, fear flickering in his gaze as though he knew something terrible had just broken loose. I felt the sting of heat rising in my cheeks, but I forced myself to breathe. It wasn't the first time Charles had lashed out at me, but never in front of everyone like this. Never with such finality. His voice grew louder, as though he wanted the entire neighborhood to hear. "We gave you everything, and this is what you do with your life. You embarrass us every time you walk into this house. Every single time." I turned to my mother, Margaret, hoping for even the smallest defense, but she only twisted her napkin in her lap, her eyes fixed firmly on her plate. Andrew parted his lips as if to speak, then thought better of it, sinking back into silence. Around me, the clatter of cutlery and hum of voices had vanished. There was only my father's fury and the pounding of my own heartbeat. I glanced at Leo, who had tucked his toy car into his pocket and was staring at me, confused and afraid. And in that instant, I realized something deep and certain. I couldn't let him grow up thinking this was normal, that cruelty disguised as discipline was love. I stood slowly, my chair scraping back across the wooden floor. My hands trembled, but I refused to let the shaking show in my voice. Leo's eyes clung to me, wide and wet, silently asking if we were safe. I bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. We're leaving." His little arms wrapped around my neck, and I lifted him up, feeling his small body shake against me. The room stayed frozen. Margaret kept her eyes lowered, her napkin shredded in her hands. Amanda pressed her lips together as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Andrew shifted uncomfortably, torn between speaking and staying silent, but in the end, he said nothing at all. No one moved to stop me. No one told me to stay. Charles's face was red, his finger still pointed in the air like a judge passing sentence. "Don't come back until you've fixed your life. You're not welcome here anymore, Jessica. Not until you stop dragging this family down." I felt a surge of heat inside me, not shame, not fear, but something sharper. A realization. For years, I had carried them quietly, covering their bills, paying their debts, even buying this very house without ever asking for thanks. And still, I was their disappointment. "All right," I said softly, my voice steady at last. 2 simple words, but they held more power than any argument I could have shouted. I walked to the hall closet, grabbed Leo's small jacket, and slipped his arms through the sleeves. I lifted my purse from the hook, then turned toward the door. The only sounds behind me were the crackle of the fire and the quiet clinking of forks being set back onto plates. Not one person said goodbye. The night air was cool as I stepped onto the porch. Leo pressed close against me. My heels clicked against the steps, and I walked out to the car parked at the curb. When I buckled him into his seat, he clutched his toy car in silence, his eyes searching mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like a failure. I felt free. As I drove away from my parents' house, the city lights of Austin blurred through the windshield, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been for years. Leo had fallen asleep in the back seat, his small hand curled around his toy car, his face soft and peaceful despite the storm we'd just left behind. I glanced at him in the mirror and a thought struck me. He deserved to see his mother strong, not small. He deserved better than the silence and shame I had swallowed for so long. When I reached my apartment, I tucked Leo into bed and then sat at my desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating the room. I opened my financial dashboard, the numbers staring back at me like a secret I had carried too long. The truth was staggering, even to me. My eco-friendly fashion brand had grown from a tiny sketchpad dream into a global powerhouse worth $100 million. 5 years earlier, I had started with nothing more than a sewing machine in a cramped apartment and a stubborn belief that sustainable fashion could matter. I spent nights designing pieces from recycled fabrics, hand-stitching samples while Leo slept in a crib beside me. I took photos of the clothes on a borrowed camera, built a website from scratch, and begged local boutiques to give me a chance. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, mornings I skipped meals to save money, days when I almost gave up. But every setback only fueled me more. Slowly, word spread. A lifestyle blogger featured my designs. Then an environmental magazine picked up the story. Orders poured in, and I reinvested every dollar, expanding into accessories and children's wear. Soon, bigger brands wanted collaborations. Investors called, fashion editors requested interviews, but I always stayed behind the curtain, letting them believe I was just a small-time designer. To my family, I was still this struggling single mom. And I let them think that because it was easier than fighting for their approval. But as I scrolled through the endless transactions that night, the mortgage payments for my parents' home, the transfers to Andrew for his loans, the quiet allowances that covered every trip, every bill, I felt something shift inside me. I had built an empire in silence, and yet, in their eyes, I was still the shame of the family. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to hide anymore. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds as I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat back down at my laptop. My cursor hovered over the payment schedules that had, for years, kept my family afloat. The mortgage on my parents' house, the car insurance, the quiet monthly deposits into Andrew's account. All of it, lifelines they never knew came from me. My finger hesitated over the cancel button for only a moment. Then, one by one, I ended every single transaction. It should have felt cruel, but it didn't. It felt like lifting bricks from my shoulders. For too long, I had allowed them to live comfortably on the empire they didn't even know I had built. Every dollar I sent had been fueled by a desperate hope that maybe, one day, they would look at me and see more than a mistake. But the night before had shattered that illusion. If they saw me as nothing more than a burden, then I was done carrying them. I emailed my lawyer, instructing her to shut down the trust account they accessed through me. I called the bank to deactivate the card my father used. I pulled up the list of utilities I had been quietly covering and moved them out of my name. With each click, each confirmation, I felt my pulse steady. It wasn't anger, it was freedom. When I closed the laptop, the apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and Leo's soft breathing as he colored at the kitchen table. He looked up at me, his little hands smudged with crayon, and smiled. "Can we go somewhere, Mom?" "Somewhere new?" he asked, his voice full of innocence and hope. I reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to stay in Austin, chained to the ghosts of a family that would never truly see me. I could choose a new place, a new start. That evening, I opened my laptop again, not to pay bills, but to book a flight. Destination: the California coast, where the ocean met the horizon and the beach house I had bought in secret waited for us like a promise. The flight to California felt like crossing an invisible line between the life I had endured and the one I was finally ready to claim. Leo pressed his face to the window, his breath fogging the glass as he pointed excitedly at the clouds. I watched him with a soft ache in my chest, realizing how long it had been since I had seen him this carefree. For years, our lives had been dictated by obligations I never confessed to him. Now, for the first time, everything ahead of us was ours. When we arrived at the California beach house, Leo's eyes widened with pure wonder. The modern glass-front home stood right on the sand, its tall windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. The salty breeze rushed in as I opened the doors, carrying the sound of the waves like a song written just for us. Leo ran barefoot across the living room, throwing open every door, his laughter bouncing off the walls. Finally, he tumbled onto the back patio and shouted with glee, "Mom, the ocean's right here." I stood at the threshold, tears stinging my eyes, not from sadness, but from release. This place had been my secret for years, a sanctuary I'd purchased quietly when my business had first taken off. Back then, I told myself it was for work trips, but in truth, it was always meant to be our escape, a place where we could breathe without judgment. The next morning, I brewed coffee and stepped onto the balcony wrapped in a blanket while Leo built his first sandcastle below. The sun rose gently over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. There was no one to frown at my laughter, no one to belittle my choices. Just the ocean, the gulls overhead, and my son's laughter echoing in the distance. At night, when Leo was asleep with grains of sand still tangled in his hair, I would sit on the patio with my laptop. Instead of bills and hidden payments, I filled the screen with words, stories and poems I had buried for years. Dreams I had sacrificed for silence now poured out of me like a tide that could no longer be held back. And with each word, I remembered who I was. Not a disappointment, not a burden, but a woman strong enough to build and rebuild as many times as it took. Days melted into weeks at the California beach house, and Leo and I settled into a rhythm that felt like a life we were always meant to have. Mornings belonged to the ocean. Bare feet in the sand, seashell hunts, and laughter chasing gulls across the shoreline. Afternoons were slower, filled with books on the porch or walks through the little coastal town nearby. Evenings ended with the sound of waves lapping against the shore and the glow of Leo's drawings taped to the glass doors, his imagination finally unburdened by fear or tension. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in molten shades of orange and violet, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Austin, Texas. I almost ignored it, but something in me said to answer. My mother's voice trembled through the line, heavy with years of denial breaking apart. Jessica, honey, we need help. The bank says we're behind on the house payments. Your father, he isn't taking it well. For a moment, I let the words hang in the air, staring out at the endless Pacific. The old me would have panicked, rushing to rescue them again, burying myself in sacrifice to earn their approval. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I drew in a steady breath. Mom, I said softly, for years, I paid for everything. The house, the cars, the bills. You never asked where it came from. You never wanted to know my story. After what happened on your anniversary night, after all the years you made me feel like a mistake, I realized I deserved better. There was silence on the other end, then the sound of her quiet sobs. I'm sorry, Jessica. We were wrong. I was wrong. Please, let us make it right. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of tears. I forgive you, Mom, but things will never go back to the way they were. If I'm part of this family, it's on my terms. No more shame. No more silence. In the weeks that followed, my father sent a short card. No grand apology, just a line that said, "We miss you. We're proud, even if we don't say it." Andrew called once, awkward and hesitant, asking about Leo and telling me about a new case. It wasn't a transformation, but it was a beginning. For the first time, they were seeing me not as a failure, but as the woman I had become. Meanwhile, I poured my heart into creating something greater than myself. I launched a foundation, Harbor of Hope, a place for single mothers to find support, resources, and dignity without judgment. I committed $1 million to start, funding childcare programs, emergency grants, and scholarships for women who needed a chance. The emails began pouring in from across the country, women I had never met, thanking me for believing in them when no one else did. One night, after putting Leo to bed, I stood alone on the patio, the ocean stretching endlessly before me. I thought back to that single word I had spoken as I left my parents' house. All right. Such a small word, yet it had rewritten the course of my life. I realized then that freedom doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it begins with a whisper, a boundary, a decision to stop living small for the comfort of others. Now, I live not as someone else's disappointment, but as my own proud, imperfect, extraordinary self. With Leo's laughter in my ears, the Pacific whispering at my door, and a purpose that reaches far beyond me, I finally believe what I never thought I could. I am enough. They thought I would always stay silent. They thought I would keep carrying them while they crushed me with their words. But the truth is, I was the one holding their world together, and the moment I let go, everything changed. Now I live on my own terms, with my son by my side, and a future built by my hands. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was simple. I walked away, I cut them off, and I proved that I am enough. This was my revenge. And like I always say here on Revenge Repeat, sometimes the best payback is living a life they can never control again.